Good morning.
Good morning.
Bruce issued the invitation. Did anyone want to speak 15 minutes about Russia, United States, anything? So, of course, 1960 to 1963, Kennedy and Khrushchev and the assassination of President Kennedy, November 22nd, 1963. All of us remember where that was. It was a brutal public murder which is intended and did traumatize every one of us, and none of us have recovered from it. That was a manifest turning point in history. A manifest turning point in history. Millions were killed on November 22nd, 1963. Think about it. Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Indonesia, Central America. Millions were murdered. And why was President Kennedy killed? By the Central Intelligence Agency without any question what at all. I'm not going to present any conspiracy theories. I'm only interested in facts and evidence. If somebody says they don't believe much in conspiracy theories, you know they're a subject of mind control. So the two sub-themes of my little talk today is mind control and the power of truth, truth force. What Gandhi called satyagraha, that simply knowing the truth is a force, not what you're going to do with it, not the practical materialistic, but the truth is a force in our world. Gandhi said truth is God, and the scripture said God is truth. So Jim Douglas has written JFK and the Unspeakable. It's a fundamental text for any American. And when Khrushchev sent a secret letter to President Kennedy, he had to make it secret because what was the context? And that's what I was going to create a little bit, the context of the Cold War. In the context of the Cold War, a communication between Khrushchev and Kennedy had to be secret. And he sent him a secret letter and said to the President of the United States, I think you and I are like the captains of Noah's Ark. Isn't that a powerful, beautiful? And Kennedy wrote back, secret courier, secret correspondence, Premier Khrushchev, I like your analogy. And they had an ongoing secret correspondence. Now, in the context of the Cold War, and this is so hard perhaps for the younger generation to understand, but in the context of the Cold War, President Kennedy's turn towards peace was an act of treason. He was a traitor to the Cold War. The national security apparatus, of course, set up massive secrecy throughout all of academia, government, military, corporations, media, CIA, everywhere. They had the secrets. Within that, a human exchange had to be secret. And in the eyes of Dulles and Allen Dulles as head of the CIA, John Foster Dulles, Cold Warrior par excellence, this was an act of treason, and this traitor had to be murdered brutally, bloodily, publicly, and the manifest turn of history back to the Cold War. Kennedy, Johnson ordered troops escalated into Vietnam from that Monday forward. So without going into the Kennedy, which I think Bill will, the John F. Kennedy, the Jim Douglas book, I want to set a little bit of the context of the Cold War and how amazing to be here in Moscow. I can't tell you how honored I am at your invitation, your hospitality, to be speaking about the Cold War here. Just makes me tremble. Yeah, thank you. So where did it start? Where did this erupt from? What's the hostility between the beautiful, magnificent architecture, people, culture that we see all around us here in Moscow? The churches, the icons. Carrie and I have been bathing in the beauty of the Vladimir Mother of God and the face of God and the face of Jesus in various churches. Where did this hostility come from? And I think I can tell you a few points and see if you agree. January 1943, many Americans, I don't think you're taught in school, the Casablanca Directive. Churchill and Roosevelt said, it's time to stop bombing the military targets, it's time to start bombing the civilian populations. Extermination bombing. Dresden, February 1945, perhaps the most famous manifestation of that. But all 50 cities of Germany, 200 cities in Japan looked like Hiroshima. Extermination bombing. The Geneva Convention, the Hague Convention, all international law, all human morality was abandoned, directed. And we learned that in the Marine Corps. To win a war, you either defeat them on the battlefield or you break the will of the people to resist. And how do you break their will? You kill their women and children. You bomb their cities. May 9th, 1945, the defeat of Germany. The war is over. Japan is crushed, but nonetheless, Trinity. July 16th, I think that's the beginning of the Cold War. The development of an atomic bomb, soon after followed by August 6th and August 9th, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The epicenter of the Hiroshima bomb was the Shimo Maternity Hospital. The aiming point of the Nagasaki bomb was Urakami Cathedral, the oldest, largest center of Christianity in Japan. If we cannot wake up, if we as Americans cannot repent, cannot weep and tear out our hairs, what would the big three? And look at the whole Second World War comes down to three men. Churchill, Stalin, and Roosevelt are deciding the fate of the entire earth. And at Trinity, there's the conference in Potsdam, a suburb of Berlin, in crushed and ruined Germany. The big three are meeting, and this time it's Truman, Attlee, and Stalin. And Truman gets the news of Trinity, and he's jubilant. He's filled with joy and exultation because the Russians are going to do what we say, and we don't need them in the East. We don't want them in Japan. That has got to be the beginning of the Cold War. Threat. I don't think the Russians ever carried out extermination bombing. I don't think you ever targeted women and children by bombers. But now you've got an ally who not only does that, but develops a weapon that instead of 1,000 planes that were involved in Dresden, you can do one plane. So at Potsdam, Truman starts to get ugly and snubs Stalin and lets the Russians know they better know their place at the back of the bus. And we're not going to let them in on like any equal ally. 1946, Churchill comes to the heart of America, Missouri, and talks about an Iron Curtain coming down across Eastern Europe, the Iron Curtain speech. 1947, the National Security Act and the Central Intelligence Agency is established. Now, the price we've paid for the Central Intelligence Agency is secrecy, surveillance, and the assassination of King, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, John F. Kennedy, and Malcolm X. Our moral leaders murdered. NATO is set up 1949. What's the purpose of NATO? 12 nations in the United States. The Supreme Commander said it's very simple. Keep the United States up, keep Germany down, and keep Russia out. Every piece of news you read will fit into that lens. The United States, and this is the United States and the British Empire. If you're not an English-speaking person, you're not in the game. It is the British Empire and the United States co-joined for world domination. And so that's important to remember. The United States and British Empire up, Germany down. Germany is prosperous. Remember, it's an occupied country. There's no democracy of substance in Japan or in Germany. These are occupied countries. They are satellites of the U.S. empire. 1953, we're talking about the origins, the buildup, the freeze of the Cold War. How does it happen that the United Nations, which is founded to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, becomes authorized to incinerate Korea, north and south? There was no targets left. Every city and town and village was bombed. There were massacres. Jeju Island, one of the most extreme. How did this happen that the United Nations, remember, it was not called a war, it was called a police action. Eisenhower is often, we put a little cloak over him, you know, the military-industrial complex speech. When he came into office, there were 200 nuclear weapons. When he left, there were 20,000. We need one more zero here. Unbelievable. 20,000 nuclear weapons. This is the period of the purge. Josie's father is a victim. The House Un-American Activities Committee. Nixon is nothing but an anti-communist, whatever. Yeah, that's his whole career, and his whole is built on this. And the victims are in our from literature, poetry, drama, music. We suffered. Even the father of the Manhattan Project, Oppenheimer, was purged. He was purged because he was asked to build the H-bomb, and he said, well, what would the target be if you take a Hiroshima and add 3 zeros? If you move from kilotons to megatons and you go into 1,000, what would the target be? A pariah, security clearance withdrawn. A traitor, like Kennedy, a Cold War traitor. 1953, the death of Stalin, Russian H-bomb. They're terrified, of course. They think they have got to have some mechanism of defending themselves. And by the way, I had a different feeling about the Russian military in their stance of defending their country. It's very different in the United States, where we're always invading Europe, or invading Japan, or invading Okinawa, or the sense of the military defending the beauty of this city and of this country. In any event, Khrushchev begins the process of de-Stalinization. He announces coexistence. He rejects the Leninist principle that war is inevitable. And this correspondence begins, and Kennedy comes into office. Mind control. What is it? Okay, you say Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and they say Pearl Harbor. That's mind control. Have you all experienced that? What about Hiroshima? What about Pearl Harbor? Mind control. Now, Kennedy was murdered by the CIA. I don't believe much in conspiracy theories. You know, that's mind control. There is no teacher that could survive in a high school. Probably very few ministers that could ever survive in church if they said what I'm saying right now. Nobody could run for office at any level, state, city, federal, saying what I'm saying right now. That's mind control. We know the limits of what we cannot say, of how our minds are controlled, of what we cannot think, of what the truth we cannot expose. But Jim Douglas spent 13 years writing this book because he believes in the force of truth. That this is a hopeful narrative. When two enemies, Khrushchev and Kennedy, turn to each other, they send secret love letters, and they avert world catastrophe in October 1962. Whenever anybody asks me, what about the Russians? I say, I love the Russians. They saved my life. Khrushchev saved my life in 1962. Saved all of our lives, saved our world. It wasn't brinkmanship. What's all this bullshit about brinksmanship, that going to the brink? Remember all those articles? No. It was saving the world. And Robert Kennedy going up to the Russian embassy in the midnight hours and saying, you've got to help us. Our military has a plan not only to attack Cuba, but to first strike against Russia. The general told Kennedy, 25 million U.S. casualties, but we'll win. And they wanted to do it. Now we are in the grips of mind control by a group of militarists and capitalists who are literally out of their minds. They are literally out of their minds. So I think I've used my time. It was a straight line from here to GWAT. You know what GWAT is? Global War on Terror. You can see which war zone you're in, world military structure. CENTCOM is the warfighting command, and it's the truth force, the force of truth that Jim Douglas has offered us. And isn't it amazing? Two theologians, David Ray Griffin, the new Pearl Harbor, about the inside job of the World Trade Center. Anybody knows you can't bring down a skyscraper with gasoline, and you can't kidnap a plane with a box cutter 4 times. So the thing is to perpetrate a massive crime publicly and then make anybody who speaks the truth look ridiculous. Thank you so much. Bill, you're going to pick it up.
Thank you, John.